Robert Rosenthal here of IlliniBoard.com for another edition of Sunday No Huddle, a much different vibe than when you and I last spoke.
That's right.
After the Michigan win, Illinois dropping 2 games in a row. Since we didn't talk last week, though, I want to backtrack and hear your thoughts on the Oregon game. Illinois kept out of the end zone for all but the third quarter.
Yeah, that was a very clear midway through the first quarter. Wow, there are teams with a lot more talent kind of a game. You know, you could see it. You could see it in the receivers and the tailbacks and everything, but you can also see it in the offensive linemen. You know, the Oregon offensive linemen, when they're out running, it's like, how is that a 310-pound guy?
Right.
Like he's running like a tight end out there. So they were just so impressive. You can see why they're the #1 team in the country. It's very clear, especially after this weekend. So yeah, that was just sometimes you're going to be outmatched, and Illinois was fully outmatched by the Ducks.
Yeah, I've been ripe with basketball analogies as we enter this kind of overlap season, and my thoughts from that game were, we've heard Brad Underwood say 100 times, if UConn was a national championship team, we are not there.
Yes.
If that is what a top 5
Yes.
team looks like,
100%. Yes.
there is a lot of room to grow. Yesterday's game, though, Illinois keeps it close through the first half, but just continued to make mistakes on both sides of the ball and on special teams. So what were your initial thoughts coming out of the game yesterday?
My main thought coming out of the game was it was the Nebraska game again if Illinois didn't make the plays and if Illinois didn't get the sack on the final play and if Illinois didn't, a game that's 50-50 like this is going to come down to 1 or 2 plays. Look, yards were within, I think, 3 yards, like 347 to 344. First downs, 21 to 20. Like, it was an identical game from both teams, and when that happens, somebody's going to make a few plays, and the 2 fumbles, especially the last one, Minnesota rushed 3 guys, dropped 8, and still got to Luke Altmire, forced a fumble, and that won the game. Those little plays are going to end that game. In the Nebraska game, Illinois made them. In the Minnesota game, Minnesota made them.
Yeah. Luke Altmire, very uncharacteristic yesterday. He started the second half 0 for 7, and he's talked all year about taking last year's adversity and learning and becoming a better person and player through it. So what do you need to see from him through this bye week and then through the next 3?
It's funny. I mean, you could tell he was frustrated in the second half. He then turned it around. He's connecting all these passes until the fumble. You just kind of had this feeling of like, oh, the story of this game is Luke Altmire dug deep, found it, and turned it around, and they get all the way down to the 16-yard line, and they're going to score, they're going to tie it, and the fumble. So, yeah, that's the funny thing. He's cleaned up the interceptions this year, and the fumbles have haunted him.
Right.
In many of the games, actually including the Nebraska game as well. So it's just this very interesting, you're 90% of the way to the, hey, he found it and led Illinois to a comeback victory narrative, and then a fumble just kills it, and that's that. Game's over, take a knee, and it's done. So real close, but just couldn't finish the job.
Yeah, and then as far as defense goes, this is 2 really rough back-to-back games. So if you're Aaron Henry, what are you drilling into your guys over this next week and a half before you really lock in on Sparty?
I think the biggest thing, I mean, they showed improvement yesterday from what a lot of the mistakes in the Oregon game, but they still aren't getting to the quarterback. 4 or 5 sacks, get a strip sack like Minnesota did, can change a game like that. I was looking at the stats last night and what I was writing, and there's all of these. Minnesota has twice as many tackles for loss, twice as many sacks, twice as many deflected passes, that type of thing. Those are the little things a defense can do to alter a game. Maybe some of those deflected passes are going to get picked off. Maybe some of those sacks are going to be strip sacks, that type of thing. In certain statistics, they're called havoc statistics, is the defense creating havoc. And if Minnesota did it twice as much in all of the havoc categories, they're probably going to win a 50-50 game, that's everywhere else. So it's that type of thing. They just have to get to those things. A tackle for loss here to force a 3rd and long, a forced fumble here, just has to come from those things, and they're just not happening at the same rate as the opponent.
Right. On the topic of bye weeks, entering the second bye week of the season, Coach Bielema has been complimentary all season of how it was structured, the 5 games, the 5 games, the break 4, break 3.
Yep.
Are you a fan of having an extra week to recover physically and mentally from this loss before
Yes.
these back three?
Especially after the back-to-back losses. And especially with all these injuries. I mean, who knows what some of these are going to be when we find out of, what was Hank Beatty's injury? What was, other things that are still hanging out there and unknowns until the press conference or until, doctor visits and that type of thing happen this week. But yes, it's a good thing. Illinois has this history with bye weeks that they were always early. Illinois fans would complain of oh look,
Interesting.
Michigan gets a bye week mid-October, right in the middle of the season. Illinois would get a bye week on September 21st and then have all these games. So, this is one of those years where Labor Day and Thanksgiving are 13 weeks apart, and so everybody gets 14 weeks apart from the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So everybody's getting 2 bye weeks this year, and it's really good for Illinois that they're spaced like they are because they need this second one very badly right now.
Right. And when you look at those last 3 games, Michigan State, Rutgers, Northwestern, what's your vibe check? Are you feeling good about those being your back 3? Is there one or more that scare you? How do you feel about those being the way Illinois ends this season?
I mean, statistically, I was looking at this last week. Statistically, who knows how these teams are going to finish, but statistically, Illinois has the easiest November schedule in the Big Ten. There's no Penn State showing up here, or they don't even have a Wisconsin or an Iowa that might be a test. It's 3 teams that might not go to bowls. Not sure. They could be, around 6-6, but might be 5-7 or 4-8 teams. Northwestern might be 3-9. Who knows? So it's just really, that kind of a thing that there's a test. Look, I was looking at some of the analytics today of just lists that rank all 134 teams and that type of thing. In one of them, Oregon was 6, Penn State was 10, Minnesota 33. And then all the teams Illinois beat, like Michigan was 44, and Kansas was 40, that type of thing. So it's this whole thing of you've lost to the 3 teams that are in the top 35 there. You've beaten the teams that are ranked maybe 40 on down to whatever Purdue is ranked. So you've kind of you're kind of slotted in the middle between those, and now you have 3 teams that are all ranked 60 and above in some of these rankings nationally. So it's an opportunity, right? You have a bye week. You can hopefully get a little more healthy, and you have an opportunity against 3 teams. You should probably be favored against all 3, and you should at least go 2-1. So I think that's the bar that's set.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see the lines for those away games. I think that'll be very telling of the national
Agree.
check of the Illini.
Yes, especially the true road game at Rutgers.
Right.
The Wrigley game is. I mean, as you may know, in 2010, the Wrigley game was way more orange than purple. It was more of a home game than it was a road game, and I think it will be the same thing this year, that type of environment. So you really kind of only have one road game left, but that'll be very interesting at Rutgers. What if Rutgers is going into that game with 5 wins and trying to get that 6th win to get to a bowl? It's going to be really tough.
Yeah, I anticipate the same thing at that Wrigley Field game, and I am really looking forward to it.
Yes.
Robert, thank you so much.
You got it.
We'll take another week off and then be back in 2 weeks to chat Illinois, Michigan State.